yes, like Betsy said today, she's excited as she can be, considering we're talking about death. So I appreciated that level of excitement. But yes, it's never fun to talk about, but it truly is a gift. I mean, I remember the day my parents said, you know, we have our plot, we have everything planned out. And I just remember thinking, first of all, no, we're not talking about that. I'm so thankful that I'll have done this. You know, it just kind of takes the burden off of the children, which is nice.
Yeah, it is.
Let me see here. Okay. Okay, well, as you all know, we are going to record these. So I think a lot of people, I mean, just like we were saying, it is uncomfortable to talk about this. And I think some people might be a little hesitant to even join the Zoom, you know, because they're thinking, gosh, that kind of makes it real. So these are recorded, and I envision people going back to the recordings on their own time and saying, okay, now I'm to a point. Now I'm ready to do this. So I'm so thankful. I think I heard, Tish, you were getting some email information from Jean Ann about how to access our previous sessions. So I am thankful that those are going to be available for people, as will this one. So I would like to thank everyone who is with us tonight for being here for our last session of Getting Your Affairs in Order. And tonight, as you know, we are going to talk about the gift of your story. So it's a real treat to have Jean Ann Bell and her daughter, Betsy Bailey, with us tonight to walk us through the steps of writing our own obituary. So I invited them to be with us because first respect these ladies. And what'd you say? Am I cutting out?
Up a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. So if you missed that, I have the utmost respect for both of these amazing women. That's the first reason I invited them here tonight. And also because they have quite a bit of experience with writing obituaries. And they have even written obituaries for members of our own congregation. I'm correct on that. Yes. I think Philip Williams, yes, you said that Jean Ann wrote one for your mother. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. So they have experience, and I included both of their bios with the worksheet for this evening. So I hope you had a chance to look over them. But rest assured, they are very well qualified to speak with us tonight. So I'm just thrilled that you both agreed to be with us. So I would now like to turn it over to both of you.
Well, thank you, Kiki, and thank you, First United Methodist Church. This was interesting. When Kiki texted and asked me, she said, "I've got a question for you," and it's a little different one, but I was very touched that you thought of me. And then when she told me what she wanted, she said, she remembered that I had written the obituary for our beloved Janet Crane, longtime member of your church family, and one that we all loved and adore still. And I said, well, I'm happy to do that for you all, but my mom is the professional obituary writer. So I thought it would be much better for her to be here with us tonight as well. So what we decided to do, we kind of broke it down into an outline form. And I know that Tish, last week, I kind of went through your worksheet, Tish, to see what you had done. So what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit of a review. But if you'll turn with us on page 3, you should have that where it has funeral plans. And so for the obituary, and Mother's going to really talk about the nuts and bolts of the obituary, but what I thought I would talk about is kind of a review for what you all discussed last week, and we provided you a form so that you can just keep that in a safe space. I know most of us have some sort of safe at our home that we can provide for our loved ones, and you will have the opportunity to let them know where things are held, and maybe even put in these handouts and fill them out so that they'll be right there for them. So of course you're going to want to choose your officiant. I know there are different ways. I don't know how the Methodist Church does it. Usually it's the pastor at the time of the family, but sometimes people want people who have been pastors for them in years past, or maybe a close friend or family member who is a pastor. I know in the Presbyterian Church, it's pretty typical that if you pass away, then the officiant will be the one who is the current pastor in your congregation at the time. But of course, anyone can do that a different way. And it's important for you to write down if you have a special family member or friend who you would like to officiate the service. Please make sure that you write that down, and maybe that person, along with the current pastor, could do so. Again, I know that Tish wrote some scripture.
Sorry.
Choose a meaningful scripture that you might like to use included in the service, and possibly put that on the bulletin for your service. Or, I've seen in obituaries, people have actually included some of their favorite scriptures. So that's certainly something to consider, as well as your vocalist. Usually, sometimes, we have a whole choir, and that would be something that if you wanted the entire First United Methodist Church choir to perform at your service, write that down. Make sure that your family members know. And I think that's the beauty, just what you were saying, Kiki, of what you're doing here, is you're making it easier for your loved ones, because we know that during these times, it's difficult enough losing someone that you love, but to have to be thinking about all of these things all at one time, and sometimes it's sudden, and sometimes you've had a lot of time to plan, you've had a lot of time to talk, but it would just be best to have that in one place so that your close family and friends will know where it's located, as well as someone who might give the eulogy. You may have a family member, a grandchild, that you want to say some things about you. You may have a member of our community who has known you for years and years, and that's a good time to have them perform the eulogy. And oftentimes, and this may just be my personal opinion, but we have eulogists, and they stand up and they read exactly what is written on the back of the order of service, and that's okay. But I have always appreciated, when I've attended a service, to have someone who's the eulogist to give some interesting stories, or some stories of the person's contributions to our community, or whatever it may be. Oftentimes, my father actually has done many eulogies. If we were talking about eulogies, he'd be the one to talk to, and he always tries to add a little humor. It may seem strange to laugh at a funeral, but really, what is a service of life? It's a celebration of life, and so that's something to consider. You will want to pick out your favorite songs, and maybe a favorite soloist that you have in your church. And I know all of your church members, the people who sing in your church, are just always a joy to hear. I know you spoke about pallbearers, and it may be that you want to have honorary pallbearers as well. Maybe you want to choose the, say, 6 close friends that you would like to have as your pallbearers, but you may have a Sunday school class, or I know Philip, Patty, you all are in the choir. You may have members of the choir that you would like to see as your honorary pallbearers, and maybe have a seated area that's defined just for that group of people. And I would also remind you to decide ahead of time, who is your preferred florist. We have some amazing, I see Lisa Ray's on here, and we have some amazing florists that just bring, the most dignity and work with the family so well. And we have several of those around town. Decide who you would like for your family to deal with. And that's something that you might write down. I know you spoke about your video or a slideshow that often they will show maybe at a visitation or maybe before the service begins. I would go ahead, even if you don't pull together photographs that you want to use, maybe just have a box and tell your loved ones, say, this is where this is located, and it would be easier for your loved one to find. Also, and this sounds a little morbid, but this is what we're talking about, I guess. You know, I know I've lost, our family has lost two loved ones just in the last 2 years. And um, my aunt was very, very specific about what she wanted to be buried in. And so when mother and daddy moved her to the assisted living, my mother kept the dress at her home, at our home. And they knew that that's what she wanted to be buried in. Also, jewelry. Some people would prefer to be buried in some jewelry, or they may prefer to wear jewelry while in the casket. And then you need to find out from those people, do they want to be buried with that jewelry, or would you prefer that the funeral home remove that and return it to the family? Those are just some things, that you might need to consider, that I know we're probably not thinking about right at this time, but it's always something I think that we can make things easier on our loved ones. And let me see here. Also, you will want to designate someone that you have on file to keep these sheets. You might make copies of them, put some in the safe, your lockbox at the bank, maybe just give it to a family member that you know will be a part of the planning process after you pass. And also, you'll want to make sure that these people are clear on what you want. Talk to them, designate a family member or friend to do that. And also, Mother and Philip were just talking about, Mother writing, Aunt Millie's, I call her Aunt Millie. Right. So, writing her obituary, and she said that, they had to do a lot of calling around at that time. But you will need to designate someone who is willing to call the pallbearers. Of course, it's the funeral home is always happy to do that for you, but it's kind of nice. I know that when my grandmother passed, it was nice for my uncle and my father to be able to talk to those close family members that had been a part of her life for so long and ask them to be something so special in the celebration of her life. So you will want to make sure that you have someone who is able to do that and can make contact with each one of those people. So that's really, mine is more of a review of what you went over. Mother, you probably noticed that if you read our bios, and those of you who know us, that they're very similar. I kind of followed in her footsteps. And so she's the one who is the creative writer, and so she's going to talk to you a little bit about the actual writing of the obituary. And Mother, if you have anything that maybe I missed, please feel free to throw that in there.
Well, I don't think you missed anything, Betsy, but I will echo what you said about we felt very honored to be asked to do this, and we really have just come, ironically, how I got started writing obituaries was about, I'm going to say it was about 80 last there. I got a call from one of my former students, and she said, Miss Bell, I want you to direct. I got a call from I don't know anything about weddings, and she said, well, if you can direct a play, you can direct a wedding. So I got started directing weddings, and back in that time, the Daily Citizen would allow brides to have huge write-ups about their weddings. Everything from describing the flowers, the dresses, who back in that time, the Daily Citizen was in it, where they were from, what the reception was like, to have huge directing the wedding. So I started doing that. And then I guess I graduated to obituaries. I don't know. The newspaper has quit doing that. They won't allow brides to do that anymore, but they will allow a long obituary. So that's a little bit how I got started. So if you will look at page 1, which says personal information for an obituary. And as Betsy has already said, and we may kind of go over the same things, but in order to get it all in, it is helpful if this is done beforehand, because if not, it gives the person who is writing it more difficulty. And so to have all this information ahead of time and to have what you want is important. Certainly the funeral home would write the obituary for you. It probably would not, unless you had a lot of information, it wouldn't be as personal as one that would be written by someone that you designated. But also you want to pick someone who has writing skills, because that's important too. And then if you'll look, as I said, at page 1, a lot of this is certainly self-explanatory. You want to be sure and have the name, have it spelled correctly. In fact, have everything spelled correctly. The date of the death and the place where the person passed. And then, of course, you want to include when they were born and where they were born. Parents usually are in the first part of it, who the parents of the deceased are. And that's something sometimes to think about too, because there may have been extra parents. There may have been a situation where someone was born to someone but was raised by someone else. So you want to be sure and include all those that were important to the deceased. The next thing I think is education. Usually there will be high school that the person attended. Usually you don't see too much of what their involvement in high school is, but hey, it's certainly fine to put it in there if you have all of that. And then college and post-college training. And then you want to think about the person's life. What did they do? What was their job? What kind of vocation? What was their, maybe they had military service. And I think that is always really important to put in there. And any kind of post-college training that they may have had, all of these certainly can be put in there. Any kind of honors that the person may have had. They may have been a pillar of the community, and you want to include that. And it's like Betsy said, if it's the eulogy or the obituary, whatever it is, it's so nice to really know someone and see if you maybe not be someone that you're acquainted with and you don't know anything about their loved one. But when you can read all of this, it just gives you more of a knowledge of who they were. And then, of course, organizations that the person may have been in, church affiliation, where they went to church at the time of their death, or maybe other places that they had served in some kind of organization or a church particularly. Volunteer activities, their hobbies, what they like to do. This is all really nice to read. And then you want to go to the predeceased family members. They may have lost a child before they died, and we'll look at it in the sample obituary that I wrote. But you don't necessarily have to rename the parents if you've already done that at the beginning. But if they, of course, passed before this person, who is the spouse, and then who their children are, who their siblings are. And you might want to include nieces and nephews, because sometimes those are just like children. And so you want to include them. And the person wants them included because they were special people in their lives. And any special friends that they may have had. All of this can be included. And then we get to the visitation details. Sometimes, of course, you know, the visitation can be at a funeral home. It can be at the church. We have had our visitations for our loved ones at home because that's what we wanted, to invite our friends to come in and be in our home. Um, Now it's a little more difficult, what with social distancing and that. And you will see in obituaries now, I've read a lot of them where they will say the COVID-19 or pandemic rules will be in effect, where there will be social distancing, and they may ask that they wear masks or stay 6 feet apart. But that's something new that has come in to having to write in the obituary. But you want to be sure, if there is a visitation, that the date is there, the time is there, and the place is there. And then, of course, the service details. And that can be as specific as you want it to be. We'll look at the sample in just a minute, but you will notice, I think I included that the officiant is included. His name is there, or her name is there. And the pallbearers, if you would like to include that as well. Certainly then the interment place. And sometimes that's private, and so people are not invited to be a part of that, but sometimes they are. What cemetery it is, once again, as I said, you may wish to include the names of the pallbearers, the honorary pallbearers. As Betsy said, a lot of times these are extra people that have meant something in your lives, like a group or an organization. And then I think it's very nice to include memorials, because people a lot of times will want to give a memorial, or they will want to send flowers or whatever. And if you include that, that just takes the burden off them to find out. And be sure, I think it's important to include the name of the organization if it's a memorial, and the address. And so that way people can just send that without having to look up anything. And so it's important to do that. Some people like to include in the obituary a special word of thanks to a caregiver that has been important in the life of the person who has passed. And so those can be done there. Sometimes it's not only a person, it may be a group of people, like a hospital group or a rehab or a nursing facility. Any of these things, of course, can be included. And then you would want to have a photograph on file, a photograph that people would like to have put there. You will sometimes see two photographs. You'll see one of the person when they're young, and then you'll see one at an older age. So that brings us then, of course, to the money aspect and the cost of obituaries. I did check with one of the funeral homes. I thought I knew what it was, but I wanted to be sure. The first 50 words, and you might want to make a note of this because I didn't include it in the outline, but the first 50 words are free in both the Daily Citizen and the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Those are the only two papers I know about. If you want to send it somewhere like out of state, maybe a place where the person had lived before or where family members are, you would just need to check with the funeral home or the newspaper itself. The first 50 words are free in both papers, and then for the Daily Citizen, for every word after 50, it's 35 cents for each word and $10 for the photo. For the Democrat Gazette, it is 99 cents for over 50 words and $30 for the photo. And yes, it can get very expensive. You know, if you have a long obituary, you're going to have a long bill. Of course, that goes through the funeral home. That's all included, but they, of course, charge extra because they have to pay that to the newspapers. So there are the basics on possibly what you would want to include in a sheet that you prepared for your family members. If you look at page 4, and I have to tell you this, maybe you won't think this is funny, you probably had to be there for it to be funny, but I thought, okay, so maybe I could just make something that would be kind of a model that you could plug words into, and certainly this can be revised in any way. But I sat down and I wrote it, and it's obviously, as you can see, it's fictitious, but I tried to demonstrate what might be included in one. And so I got it written, and then I came in and I started reading it out loud to Watson. And I think that is the only time during this pandemic that I have belly laughed. But it just sounded so funny to me to be saying these names of somebody. Certainly the things around it are real, but the people obviously are not. But it did sound funny to me. So if you'll look kind of line by line, I think we can make some comments on how some of these things could be different. You can see that our deceased is John Doe, and he passed away on June 29th, 2020. Well, I like, it's just personal. I like passed away, or, but some people like other things a little more flowery. They might want to say entered into eternity, or transition from this life into heaven. I mean, that's just personal things that people want to do, and that's fine. But notice the date is there of the death and the place where he passed. You can also include the specific place that he passed, like he may have been at home, or he may have been in the hospital or in a nursing facility. And if you want to include that, that's fine too. The next thing you notice, I listed who his parents were, James and Jane Smith Doe, and he was born on January 1st, 1945. I hope these years all add up. I don't know. I tried to make them. But he was born at Baptist Hospital. That tells us exactly where he was in Little Rock when he was born. But he was a resident of Searcy because he graduated from Searcy High School with honors in 1963. And I think that's also important to include the years in which they studied. And then attended the University of Arkansas, where he was a pre-med major. After graduation, he entered the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences, and after 4 years there, he accepted a surgery residency at Baptist Memorial Healthcare System in Memphis, Tennessee. Had to get our hospital over in Memphis in there. Following completion of his medical training, he entered the United States Army as a captain and trained at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. That satisfies if someone has had military service. And I do know that Fort Sam is where they train medical people, so I included that. Following training, he was assigned to Fort Benning, Georgia, where he completed his military service at the rank of lieutenant colonel. And that's also nice to know how they served our country and what their rank was, and that. Doe returned to Searcy and enjoyed a very satisfying medical career serving as a surgeon affiliated with Unity Health, where he served as chief of staff. Notice also, I included this sentence, he also was instrumental in mentoring young surgeons that studied and practiced in the hospital. That showed the importance of this person, the importance of his life, how he impacted other people while he was alive. And that's really important, I think. It's just a tribute to people when they have been such one who has contributed to society. It ought to be noted. And then also I said he was his professional organization, so you satisfy that there. You ought to be noted. Organization, so you satisfy that section, and the American College of Surgeons. And of course that can go on. That can be as lengthy as you want it to be if someone has several things. He continued to support his college fraternity, Sigma Chi, as an involved alumnus and was a member of the American Legion. Doe was also an avid sportsman who enjoyed golf, hunting, fishing, and coaching. And I inserted this later, his son's little league team, because I kind of thought that made it more like he was really involved in his child's life. Let's see. Then, of course, he was a member of the First United Methodist Church. He was a Sunday school teacher, sang in the chancel choir, and served on numerous church committees. Once again, this shows the contributions that this person has made. Then we go to the predeceased family members. His parents, and as I said, it's not necessary to repeat their names there because you've already said that in the first sentences. And a brother, Joe Doe. His survivors include his wife of 45 years, Mary Jones Doe, his son, Dr. John Doe Jr., and his wife, Sarah Miller Doe, and his daughter, Emily Doe Martin, and her husband, Mark Martin, and his grandchildren, Elizabeth Doe and John Martin. Now, the next part, this is very important because these are the things that people want to know. Visitation with the family will be on Thursday, July 2nd at 1 p.m. in the First United Methodist Church Welcome Center with the funeral service, or if perhaps there's been a cremation, it may be a memorial service. So you could substitute that in there instead of funeral service, memorial service to follow at 2:30 in the sanctuary. The arrangements are under the direction of Powell Funeral Home. Interment will be in the White County Memorial Gardens. So you see, you can include that there, but if it's family, if it's a private interment, you can make that note also. You can say the interment will be a private, or the burial service will be private and for family only. And then the officiant, Reverend John Smith, will officiate and serving as pallbearers. And I think this also kind of just gives a special recognition when you include the pallbearers and the honorary pallbearers that these people were special to that individual. And then I have the names: Jack Martin, Bill Jones, Dr. Howard King, Dr. Kyle Rogers, Jerry Adams, and Mark Bell. And I guess standard is 6, but I have seen certainly funerals where there have been 8 pallbearers. So, and then I did include a line there that you could plug in. Honorary pallbearers are the men of the chancel choir. Memorials may be made to the First United Methodist Church. Notice that I did put the address because that just saves the person from having to go through and look all that up. 304 North Main or Unity Health, 3214 East Race in Searcy, Arkansas, 721-243. And then I did the last line: the family wishes to express their sincere appreciation to the staff at Unity Health, or that can be specific names, as we said. The main thing to consider, if all of this is done, it won't take nearly so long to accomplish arrangements with the funeral home. When you go to the funeral home to make the arrangements, this is done, and you don't have to stop and think. And it's also what the person wants too. And I think that's really important, to honor the wishes of the person who's being buried. So that is basically it. Kiki, I stole what you sent because I thought this would end this before if there are any questions, we'd be glad to try to answer if we can. But she sent me an obituary that she found in the newspaper. I don't know if she sent it to you all or not, but I'm just going to close with this because I thought it was very clever. It might not be anything that we would want to do, but nevertheless, it does tell us what this person was. It was a person who had passed from Colorado Springs. Dorothy Viola Southern, formerly of North Little Rock, passed away in Colorado Springs on July 9, 2009. She was preceded in death by her daughter, Angela Hill, and son, Ronald Whitley, and survived by her children, Stephen Grant of Colorado Springs, Linda Novak of Nashville, and Pam Boyd of Dallas, who are glad that she died peacefully and not in a shootout. Undoubtedly, she was quite a character, feisty, passionate, outspoken, and known for many shenanigans. In her 83 years, in spite of her 9 marriages, and most never had a fair chance, she sincerely delighted in, well, except sometimes when she was living near them, her 11 grandchildren. Ronnie Whitley, Heather Whitley, Christopher Grant, Tanya Bruce, Kim Vance, Shannon Cochran, Michael Novak, Susanna Hill, Justin Hill, and Hudson, Sidney, and Tammy Boyd. She also had four great-grandchildren who are only familiar with the urban legend of their crazy grandmother. Many nieces and nephews live in the Little Rock area and who sometimes remember her fondly as their unusual and unpredictable Aunt Dorothy. Almost to the end, she was still making people laugh, cussing people out, and looking for the perfect husband. So I don't know if you want an obituary like that. It just shows you that there are a variety of things, and somebody obviously took quite a lot of time and attention in making that one. So Kiki and Zoom guests, I guess at this point, if you want to make any comments, or we can talk about any questions that you might want to. So anybody?
I always forget to do that. Sorry. Wonderful question. Thank you both, Betsy and Jean Ann, for bringing this great information to us tonight. And when you read that obituary of Miss Dorothy by Ola, I believe is her name, it made me think, I didn't know her, but boy, I wish I did. You know? So
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of, when I'm writing my obituary, I want people obviously who know me, to enjoy reading it, but also people who didn't, to say, boy, I missed out on knowing her,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll open it up for questions, and then I had a few questions, but I'll save mine until the end.
Okay.
Something they would like to ask.
Sometimes people mention their pets in their obituary.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If their pets are still living.
Yeah, that's true. And I've seen that. I certainly have.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I may make that a note on my outline here.
I had a question. When I lived in Memphis, it was customary for people to list what the person had died of.
Oh, no.
And I had mixed feelings about that. The nosy part of me kind of enjoyed it. I was like, oh, okay, they were good. Well, and especially if they were young, I was always very curious, how they died.
Wow.
So do you know, like, I don't see it so much here. I guess it's just not standard. Do funeral homes tell you not to, or what is the advice given on that?
Sometimes maybe if a person has fought a long, hard battle,
Oh, okay.
disease, I've seen that more often than say died in a tragic car accident. I think that's kind of maybe getting a little too involved. What do you think, Mother?
Well, I would agree with Kiki in that, especially if it's a young person, and I don't think it's necessarily nosy. I think you just kind of wonder, well, what happened to this person, But we don't see it much around here. And like you said, like sometimes you'll see after fighting a long battle with cancer or something like that. But no, you don't, because I've had the same thoughts. If it's somebody that I read about, especially if they're in Little Rock or somewhere else where I don't know them that well, I often wonder about it. But I think that would just probably be a personal choice that people, if they wanted to include it. I don't know that the funeral home has any directive on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wondered if they did. And you kind of answered another question that I had when you talked about the cost of the obituary, because I was like, who's in and who's out? Like, I've seen some where they list, great nieces and nephews and friends of the great nieces, but it could become very expensive to do that. So,
yes.
So I guess.
Had a host of nieces and nephews.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay.
A host of, at least behind a host of family and friends,
And I think a lot of that has to do with how close the person was, especially, for example, when Betsy's great aunt passed. I mean, she had been very close to her, so naturally her name would be included there. But if it's just someone that maybe doesn't see them that often, then like she said, a host of nieces and nephews or great nieces and nephews. But yes, it would make it more expensive, definitely.
Well, I had a comment before we were talking about whether to put what happened while they died or whatever. I think sometimes when I read an obituary, if it maybe was a classmate that lives out of town or hadn't seen, it's the last 10-year reunion or whatever, it helps me to know what happened,
Yeah.
just the feelings for the family.
Right.
Whether they had been fighting cancer or whether it was a tragic accident. I think that, and especially with social media now, to reach out to the family, and it kind of lets you know more what you can say to them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I know. I've had the same thoughts, and to the point where I might even include that in mine, like, tell them how I died. I mean, it's fine. I'm not opposed to that, because I know how it is when I read an obituary. Like you said, it gives you a way to reach out and choose what you're going to say to that family.
Right.
Did we, and you may have covered this in an earlier session, but I've just thought of it. Did you talk about making sure your wishes are known, whether you want an open casket or a closed casket?
Oh, that's a good point.
We did touch on that. Yes.
Okay. I think that's always important for family members to know
Right.
what wishes are of their loved one.
That that reminded me of that other funny that I sent you all. From my, I love her, Jill Connor Brown. Do you all know that author?
No, I don't.
She's funny, and I'm just going to read this to you. It's hilarious. She said, "My sister Judy has always said that she would like to lie in state, propped up in her coffin with her eyes blared wide open, face fixed in a big grin, and have a taped greeting for all her mourners, something real upbeat and well live sounding, like, hey, cute sheep, tell your mama hey." Yeah. So I guess.
Very subtle.
Mama them.
Well, I always said I didn't want those lamps. You know how the funeral homes will have those lamps on either end? I said, don't put those lamps on either end of my casket. I don't want that.
Yeah.
Come up out of it.
Oh, I know. Yeah. And then, Betsy, when you mentioned the jewelry, I'm like, I don't know. Do many people get buried in their jewelry?
Well, some of them do, and not very wise, I don't think.
No.
But they do. But there are a lot of times, like our aunt had certain earrings that she wanted on because they would lie properly on her ears. I mean, but she wanted, and so that was okay. But she didn't want anything else. But you can ask the funeral home to take it off before they bury the person.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a personal preference, I guess, with people.
Yeah.
Lynn's got a story to share. I'll have to tell y'all a funny story. When our mother passed away, she wore glasses, and we asked to have her glasses back because we were going to give those to the Lions Club. And everything was in an envelope from the funeral home. And when we got home later on, we looked in the envelope, and there was a pair of glasses in there, but they were not our mother's.
Somebody messed up.
I got them split. Yeah.
We thought it was
Go back and tell her to just donate the ones that didn't belong to her.
Mother would have thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
We thought
at least some glasses got donated.
Yeah, Betsy had a good question. Did you just go ahead and donate those, or did you try to find the other ones?
No, we donated them.
That's good.
Oh, that's too funny. Yeah.
No, it just occurred to me too that I hadn't even thought about this, and I really should have. You could also include in an obituary if the deceased was an organ donor,
Oh,
because sometimes that is impetus for other people to realize that, that's the gift of life, even though in death. That's something that's close to my heart, and I don't know why I hadn't thought of it before. You don't see that very often, but once in a while you will. And so certainly if the person had the opportunity to be, and then the family chose to donate, that would be something to include in the obituary.
very good
I'm
point.
sure the family knows that.
Yes, and make sure the family knows that you wish to be an organ donor.
Put
Don't
that,
they have you put it on your driver's license now?
Yeah.
Yes, but they will not take organs unless the family consents. Even though you say that you want to be an organ donor, if for some reason the family chooses not to honor that, then they cannot do it. So they always say, write it down everywhere and tell a family member.
Yeah.
Because they have to have.
Ann, what about a
I'm
living
sorry?
will? What about a living will? If it's designated in there, it's your organ donor.
I think the family has to know. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Anything else?
I'm just kind of curious, what's the sweet spot for the amount of words? I mean, if I were writing my own, it would become a book. But is there a word range where you can, get enough details to give people a really good sense if you've done a lot of different things, but an over this amount of words, it's just too much?
I really don't know, Tish. I think it's just how much you want to include and how much you want to spend, because there's no. I've never seen. Have you, Betsy, a set amount?
No. And also think it depends on how much information, such as how much community service one has done, or what types of things they want included. And so I think I referenced earlier that I wrote Mrs. Crane's. Well, Larry was very specific about certain things that he wanted included in the obituary, and it ran pretty long. I would think it was close to a full page for sure. So I don't think it matters. I think it's just what you as a person want people to know about you.
Tish, write that book. Just write it.
Just write your story. That's right.
Tell your story. We'll read it. And other people will too.
Yeah, I'm kind of known for being verbose, so.
There's nothing wrong with that. I read the long obituary. Now, sometimes in the names I'll skim, but I like to know what people were involved with and how they contributed.
I like that too.
And I always think people skimp, like if they don't have long one, and maybe they can't afford it, and that's okay. But I'm like, come on, this is your final thing.
I know.
Get out there.
I think it makes more of an impression when a family doesn't put detail in the obituary, because it makes you think they deserve more than what they got. So
that's the feeling I get too. I know. But then I think maybe they were just too sad.
They have handouts, so they can just go ahead. We've got it online. They can fill out their handouts.
That's right.
And ready to go.
That's absolutely right.
something that may be important nowadays, if you have all your phone numbers in your cell phone, can somebody else get into your cell phone to find all the phone numbers?
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Give someone your passcode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A friend of mine that just recently passed away, her elderly mother had old address books with phone numbers in them that were no longer in service because people don't have landlines anymore. And the family didn't know how to get in touch with elderly family members.
Mm,
That's
yeah,
a good
it's
point.
Mhm.
So
Who
it
needs to
might
be
be when
notified?
you identify those people, maybe write down contact information as well.
I hadn't thought about that, but that's, yeah, that's good. Okay. Anybody else have final thoughts, questions?
Well, thank you for letting us be a part of this.
Well, thank
I
you so
think
much.
this is a real
Thank
thing
you,
that you all are
Betsy.
providing.
Appreciate
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, great thoughts and some additional things that I can go back and add to my handout from the last session that I hadn't thought about. You know, so really, yeah, like florist, that's such an important thing, you know, to designate a florist, and I just hadn't really thought about that, or honorary pallbearers. So those are some really good extra points that you mentioned, and I'll go back and update my handout.
Okay, good.
That'd be
I'm
great.
glad.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank y'all.
We enjoyed it.
Thank
Oh,
you.
we're glad to.
Inviting
Y'all have a very nice evening.
Thank you. You too. Thanks, Betsy. Thanks,
See
Jeannie.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.